Well, hello everyone. We're in the Golden Globe race headquarters, and we've had a big day, big celebration, because Tommy is now on a ship on his way to Amsterdam Island. It's been a hectic 3 or 4 days, that's for sure. And so I thought it was a good chance just to say good day and try and explain a bit of overview of what's actually happened, what took place. But first of all, let's just consider the whole issue of the rescue that took place. And we can't thank enough Rescue Coordination Centre in Australia. They were the lead organisation to coordinate all the activities that took place. It was a joint effort with the Australian Defence Forces and assets that Rescue Coordination Centre has, as well as the Indian Navy. That was a whole separate issue. Tommy, of course, is a serving commander in the Indian Navy. He's a trained, an active reconnaissance aircraft pilot, and he's sailing in the Golden Globe, which was his second circumnavigation. He'd previously sailed solo non-stop around the world. That was the first Indian to do that, and his boat was fantastic. It was a replica of Suhaili, built incredibly strong, brand new. It was actually heavier than the original Suhaili, and a great boat. So we're shocked at what happened, but we'll talk about that later on. So the rescue effort itself actually evolved around the Southern Ocean, the Indian Southern Ocean around here, and it's about 2,000 miles from the tip of southwestern Australia, that's Perth, all the way over to St. Paul Islands and also Amsterdam Island. This is where they were when it happened. So effectively, even though the Australians didn't ask for the support, it wasn't requested for Indian Navy and Air Force to get involved. They wanted to help their man Tommy, so they sent an aircraft from India down to Madagascar, and then that same aircraft ended up on scene at the site down here. And then the Australians also sent a jet out, so that was the second aircraft that was used, and a third one was repositioned over here to the island of Reunion, just beside Madagascar, and it operated from Reunion. So there were 3 aircraft in total that were involved. Then we were really fortunate to have the French Fisheries patrol vessel, which was actually used for surveillance and monitoring of illegal fishing boats in the Antarctic, in the Southern Ocean, a lot of tooth fishing and so on. And the boat itself was actually commandeered, taken over. It was originally a fishing pirate boat. So in other words, it was an illegal fishing boat that they confiscated and turned it into their support boat. So it operates out of the island of Reunion, but it was close enough to be the closest and only ship available at the time. It immediately changed its plans, headed to the scene. Took about 3 days to get there. It was a real challenge, so hats off to all the crew and the master of the Osiris for what they've done and what they've achieved. A very professional operation, getting the Zodiacs in the water, getting Tommy off and into the ship. And then the next one, of course, was actually Gregor. Gregor's situation, he was rolled over in the same storm, and dismasted. He wasn't in distress. He was never in distress. He was what we call a code orange, and that means that he was able to look after his own interests. He rigged a jury rig and tried to catch up with Tommy to offer any assistance he could. He didn't quite make it in time, and then that created a whole new situation, which I'll talk about at the end of this. So what's the deal with this big storm? Basically, these boats, all of the entrants in the Golden Globe race are really well prepared. They're great sailors. The boats are strong. They're capable of withstanding the Southern Ocean. However, you can always have the best prepared crew and the best skipper, the best boat, and things can still go wrong. In this instance, the storm itself was what I call a really nasty storm cell. It formed over the top of these 3 boats at the time. We'd been trying for about 3 days to route them into an area which would give minimum impact, but in the last 24 hours it did a few strange things, and it actually encircled them and did build and form right on top of them. The worst part about the Southern Ocean, most people think, is just huge winds and huge seas. Well, I've been in 23-metre seas in 70, 75 knots, and you can actually sort of cope with that because they're usually big, long swells, and the wind's blowing from one direction. It gets organised, you work out what you're going to do with your boat, and then you can just keep it going and you can manage. But this particular storm was really nasty in that it was very tight, and the wind was going around in a clockwise direction. Okay, so it's circling in a clockwise direction, And when it was surrounding the boats, you had a scenario where you would get 60 knots, 50, 60 knots of breeze blowing from the north, and a few hours later, you've got 60, 70 knots blowing from the south. Now, what that does to the sea is make it really confused and crazy. There's no format to it, not even the different swell ranges. It just goes crazy. And you can't actually set your boat up to cope with one particular type of sea. So that makes it dangerous. So then you have a situation where you've got dangerous seas that are 15 meters high in big winds, and that's where it gets really hard to cope with. So I've got to say, we're all being surprised that we've now lost 2 boats from the one storm. And the guy who survived, Mark Slats, he was simply terrified. He'd never seen anything like it before in his life, and he's done a lot of sailing. He's been through these waters before. He tried to set the boat up. He described one scene where a giant wave just literally picked up and dumped onto the back of the boat, blew out his companionway, flooded down below. He had 60 centimetres of water above the floorboards, and he was in real trouble, but managed to get his spare storm boards in and close off the companionway, pump it all out. So the power of these seas, just in confusion, is just massive. At another point, he was hand steering in the cockpit, and the boat was knocked down. He was washed over the side, managed to get back on board, and yeah, it was a tough night for Mark, but he survived. He's tidied up the boat, he's dried it out, and he's on his way again. So that was good. What happened to Gregor? This is all happening now on Friday night, and we were monitoring everything. We were prepared for things, but we didn't think it'd go as badly wrong as it did. The first message we had was from Gregor. It came in as a text message. These are the little YB3 texting devices. Most of you have seen these, but there might be new people watching. It's a satellite device, and it's just like a mobile phone, but you can't make phone calls. You actually use this keyboard to very slowly plug in up to 65 characters, and the message comes back via satellite, and we get it as an email here in the office. We can always also use this as a backup position device. It's not the unit that gives the tracking on the live tracker. That's another unit which we call a YB3i, and that unit is polling every hour or every 4 hours, depending on what we decide from here. We control those tracking units from the office here. So that's a text message from Gregor, and said he'd been knocked down and the mizzen mast, which is the rear of the 2 on his boat, was gone. So we thought, wow, getting serious. That wasn't even a code orange at that stage, because he was in control and he had another complete mast. Shortly after that, we got a text message again from Tommy saying he'd been knocked down and he'd split the mizzen boom. That was about an hour after Gregor. Shortly after that, about 1 hour later, we got the message again from a text this was a phone call. We had a phone call from Gregor on the hotline, and he notified us that he had been rolled 360, like completely upside down, and when it recovered, the main mast had now also gone. So he was in a bit of bother. He managed to cut the rig free, and he was a little distressed, but a little concerned, I should say, verbally, and in control. Managed to get warps running over the side. He continued in the storm, but survived okay. About 1 hour after we had all these 3 things happening, we received a text message from Tommy, which you've all probably seen. It simply said, dismasted, severe back injury, and I can't move. And that was like a nightmare. That was like, oh my, what are we going to do now? We knew what we'd have to do, but we were thinking desperately of Tommy. So at that point, we moved into a code red. Prior to that, Gregor had been what we call a code orange, where we were monitoring closely. We put our crisis management team on standby at that point, but when we got the message from Tommy, he was in real trouble. It was a code red, and we all formed up, and the actions take place from there. We immediately notified RCC in Canberra in Australia. This is their zone of responsibility where this happened. That's an area that they are responsible for search and rescue. We had already made communications with them many days before. They have all the information on all the entrants. They knew what was going on. They were following the entrants. So whilst there was no EPIRB, we made it very clear to MRCC that we were extremely concerned, and they made the decision then to declare this as a distress situation, even without an EPIRB. and started the procedure of notices to mariners, looking for ships in the area and so on. Then we didn't hear from Tommy for some time, and that's where we were very concerned, because we thought, we hope he's okay inside the boat. At that point, that's when it all started to come together. We were dealing with the various teams and so on. The Indian Navy have an extreme interest in Tommy. As I mentioned, he's a serving member, an officer in the Indian Navy. They immediately decided to jump in big time and send their first aircraft underway. They had a ship on standby and so on. RCC in Australia were doing the same thing. They put HMS Ballarat on alert for potential sailing orders. She was in port in Perth, and that was all happening on Friday. Ballarat actually left 24 hours later, which is a very quick deployment, which was very impressive. They quickly located a Globemaster business jet. They have access to these assets, and tasked that to fly as soon as possible out to overfly Tommy. No one had seen the boat. We had no idea what was happening visually. Tommy actually had a marine VHF handheld radio plus an aviation handheld radio. He was able to get them, but unfortunately the batteries had gone flat. So even though when he did finally make contact just before the flights, he couldn't talk on the radio. He heard the planes come through. He used his EPIRB to turn on and off and signal the planes. And then we got our first pictures and saw the boat was in a delicate situation. The rig was in the water. The big fear of that is that the mast can punch a hole in the boat, but the way it ended up was actually quite good. It was acting as a drag in the water and acting like a sea anchor. It keeps the bow a little bit onto any big seas, so that worked well. But the rear companionway, the door going down into the cabin, was wide open, so fortunately it didn't take much water down below. And then it evolved with intermittent communications with Tommy. The other thing, the battery in here was going flat, and the battery on the tracker was going flat as well, so there were some concerns about that. And Tommy had his EPIRB running, which gave us a secondary location. So then I think the story. Eventually Osiris came through. We had a boat, Ballarat left, and everything couldn't have been better. It was a really amazing cooperation with all the various agencies to bring about a successful recovery. And we're incredibly grateful for everyone that was involved with that. The degree of professionalism was amazing, and certainly the enthusiasm of the Indian Navy and Air Force was beyond question, and it meant that there were quite a few assets on scene. Anyway, now the scenario is that they're headed to Amsterdam Island. We still don't have a medical review of Tommy to see what's happening. That won't come out until he meets the doctor in Amsterdam Island sometime early tomorrow. They've been speaking to telemedicine experts on board. The crew on the Fisheries ship consists of the officers, and they're advanced first aiders rather than doctors or specialists, but now there has been specialist advice given, and we'll tell you all about what's happening to Tommy after that. Gregor was in a difficult situation here in terms of his decision to evacuate his boat, and I'll explain it like this. Gregor lost his mast, put the jury rig on, and he was fully intending to sail to Australia. He had no motor. I can put it to you that if there were no other rescue going on at the time with Tommy and Gregor was alone, he would be sailing to Australia now, and he would do his best to get there. It might take him 2 months to do the last 2,000 miles, but that would be his intention. At no stage did he declare a distress or require assistance. The difference now is that because these assets are there, if he wanted to, Gregor could get off the ship. Now, if he didn't get off onto the ship, if he didn't do that, it's the equivalent of then saying that Gregor is setting off on a new voyage into the Southern Ocean with an inefficient sailing rig, with no motor, and only the ability to hand steer. Now, no ordinary sailor, no sensible sailor would ever do that, okay? So if Gregor decided to stay on his boat and carry on to Australia, and in 3 weeks' time he gets into trouble and needed assistance, people would call Gregor reckless and irresponsible because he had a chance to get off the boat previously. So Gregor had to think very hard about this, and he made a sensible decision to accept a controlled evacuation. It's not a rescue, it's just saying if his boat was in that condition in the marina here in the Sable d'Olonne, it would be crazy to go to sea like that. It would be irresponsible and dangerous. So he's made the sensible decision to get off the boat and accept a ride home. That's the only way I can describe it. So good on Gregor for doing that. He had been working hard to get to Tommy. It didn't work out, but we appreciate that. Also, Uku, following up on the other side, he was moving as fast as he could to get to the scene. The same as they have Ballarat coming in, doing the right thing, because you never know what plans are going to involve and what will work or not. So overall, it was fantastic. Gregor will stay now, and the options to get them back to civilization, you might say, on Amsterdam Island, there's about 20 people living there. It's a research station. It's a French territory. So anyway, they'll eventually do one of a few different things, but at this stage, the official suggestion is that they will probably wait until HMAS Ballarat arrives, and they will transfer to Ballarat and probably go back to Perth in Australia. So we'll have to wait and see how it pans out. But anyway, in summary, I'd just like to say that there is no question in my mind that this was a really vicious storm. All our boats are well prepared. They can cope with the Southern Ocean. So far, this is the first distress in the entire race, and it's the only boat that's had to be rescued. When RA lost his rig, he rolled 360, lost his rig. Gregor rolled 360, also lost his rig. We're not sure whether Tommy was rolled or knocked down. We'll find that out later. He's lost his rig. Tommy's the only distress and the only rescue we've really had. So it's still a long way to go. They're all headed to Hobart right now. I'm confident that everyone that's sailing at the moment is well prepared and the boats are in good condition. So we'll look forward to seeing them get to Hobart very soon. So that's probably really about it. We are going to slowly get back into a routine. We've been living in the office for the last 3 days. I think I'll get a shower tonight. That's kind of good. All of us have been here trying to keep updates with information and also keep liaising with the various organisations and international bodies that have been operating so well to recover Tommy. So thanks very much to everyone that's involved. We're very grateful. We're looking forward to seeing Tommy eventually, sooner rather than later, but good to know he's in good hands. I think that's about all. We'll get back to normal race updates and so on as well, and look forward to continuing the adventure of the Golden Globe race. Thanks very much. I think I covered all the things I needed to cover.